Hi everybody, welcome to Saturday Live at the Backyard Bird Center. Well, this week's program is a request from the internet, and they were asking about the transition of the bird feeders / backyard for the birds for spring. What should you be looking for? What should we be thinking about? What should we be doing to get ready for the changes that come with spring? And the way this weather changed so absolutely abruptly from -12 one morning to a week later we were above 70. That's pretty amazing, and that's the Midwest. So yes, it's got a lot of people thinking about spring birds. They're already getting Oriole questions and hummingbird questions. We're not even going to get into those guys today because it's just too early to talk about those. But what we're going to talk about are those first signs of spring, those first things that you should be thinking about and maybe doing and maybe switching a little bit at your feeder stations because of the change in bird populations that's going to get ready to happen. Beautiful red wing blackbird here. Truly one of the first signs of spring to me in the bird world. They don't go very far south. We're going to talk about them in a little bit, but these birds, a lot of these birds that we're going to talk about today are birds that just go to really just to our south, maybe even just southern Missouri or Arkansas or Texas. We're not talking about a lot of neotropical migrants yet that go way down. Today it's more about those birds that don't go very far south, so they return earlier than a lot of birds, and red wing blackbirds are a prime example of that we'll start to see in a lot of those. But we'll get to those in just a minute because what I wanted to talk about first, if I can get to it, is probably one of the most important things that you should be doing right now to your bird feeders. They all need a really good cleaning. This winter, especially this huge concentration of birds that were feeding at your bird feeders in February during that very harsh conditions, when you concentrate that many living animals together, you think of anything like cattle feedlots, you think of crowded bison herds, you think of anything in nature where you bring that many animals that close together, and birds are an example of that, then if one bird is sick in there, your chance of spreading that sickness to other birds is more likely. So spring is a great time to give your feeders a really good cleaning. And the weather is so agreeable right now. Take your feeders down, dump them out, wash them with a good soapy water mix. I like Dawn to get them, and get that all the dirt and the grime and the buildup and the oil, all that for the cleanliness of the feeders. But the absolute most important thing you need to do is give your bird feeders a spray down or a soaking in a 10% bleach solution. That's 1 part bleach, 10 parts water, and that will kill any bacteria. There was a lot of talk about salmonella this winter because of a report in the far west, in the Washington state, about some pine siskins from the Alaska region that could have been carrying salmonella. We don't get those birds, but it's always a good idea to protect your birds and to protect you to give your feeders a good cleaning. We do our bird feeder cleaning day in the fall, but I hope that's not the only time you clean your bird feeders. To be a good steward of bird feeding, you should clean them far more regularly than that. So a good feeder cleaning, I can't emphasize that enough. It should be the number one thing you do for the spring, for the health of your birds and for the health of you. The next thing you think about doing is what I'm doing this weekend is I'm raking up all the hulls that have built up on the ground under my feeders. Niger hulls, black oil sunflower hulls, millet husks that are laying there. I rake all those up, take them out into the woods and throw them out there to decompose and keep hopefully down on the germination of that stuff. That if they're laying there in your loose dirt, they can, when the temperature gets right, the water gets on them, they could germinate. So good time to rake up your hulls and take them out and throw them out there. So those are 2 maintenance things that are really good to do in early spring. Now, we're going to start looking for a transition at your bird feeders. That is arriving birds and departing birds. Now, we talked a bit last week, a week before, about goldfinches transitioning, where these birds don't leave. As a matter of fact, we get more goldfinches in winter than we do in spring and summer. But right now, before a lot of these northern birds leave, which by the end of the month, you're going to see a real decrease in your number of goldfinches, but the ones who remain are going to transition or molt into their breeding plumage. The male and female goldfinches here, the bright yellow, canary yellow poking through there, they're molting. That means they're losing their old, pushing out their old feathers, getting in their new breeding plumage feathers, and by the time this guy's finished, they're going to look more like this. What a beautiful scene. Lots of goldfinches on the finch feeders there. So my goldfinch numbers are at about 75 right now. By the end of the month, I guarantee I'll be down to about a dozen birds at my feeders. A lot of birds are going to be moving north again, and that's normally what will happen. Along with them, we'll lose our juncos. The juncos will start pulling out. A lot of these pine siskins will start to leave. Red-breasted nuthatches will start to leave. A lot of these birds are going to be heading back up to their nesting sites, which are our north, a lot of in the pine forest to the north, and those birds are going to head back there, and so you'll be losing those. So expect that to happen. So what birds are coming in that we have to look forward to seeing? Well, again, not so sure. Red Wing Blackbirds are beautiful birds, and a lot of them will be rolling in. But when you get 100 of them in your backyard, a lot of people tend to complain, and that can happen in early spring, especially if you live near a wet area, like if you have cattails, a pond, or a lake nearby. The Red Wing Blackbirds can be quite numerous. Usually, for the most of us, we only see a handful in our yard, and they're actually a pretty addition. This, of course, is the male, and he's showing his red epaulets. He's trying to attract a female, and he's singing his conqueree song here in this action photo. So Red Wing Blackbirds will be rolling in anytime, and sometimes in really good numbers. Brown-headed Cowbirds. I've only seen one so far at my feeders. They're going to... Yeah, Ruth said she's already had 20. So yeah, they're starting to roll in now. Again, a bird that didn't winter very far south, and they're coming in. And like most blackbirds, these guys are primarily grain eaters. They like, along with the common grackle, they like millet and cracked corn and a lot of those things that we don't like putting in our seed, so we try to keep that away from the discourage these guys. Well, spring and summer are the seasons that gets exaggerated. Like if you have nuttenberry out in an open tray, these common grackle are going to devour it. And that's why this is at Carrie's house. Carrie has this open tray feeder with nothing but safflower in it. And these grackle are mad. You can see the looks on their faces. They're really upset. They hate safflower seed, and they'll toss around and they'll look for a sunflower seed or a peanut in there. But that is a transition that we're talking about here. We have a lot of people that have two basic feeding regimens. They have their fall-winter feeding where they feed their nuttenberry and their peanuts and their sunflower chips and all that. But when these guys show up, and the Red Wing Blackbirds show up, and the Cowbirds show up, some people have such a bad problem with them, their only solution is to switch to a lot of safflower in any open trays, because that's what they can get to. Now, if you still want to, you definitely want to feed your sunflower chips and anything with peanuts in it. Cage feeders are awesome for that. Anything downy, woodpecker, and smaller can fit through these cages. So goldfinches, chickadees, titmice, purple finches, downy woodpeckers can all get in these cages and feed on seed that those blackbirds would normally devour. So if you have safflower out in those open trays where they can get to, and you keep the good stuff inside a cage feeder, those will help greatly deter your blackbirds and to keep them. And hopefully what you're hoping for is if you make it really hard for them to find those grains, millet, milo, and all those things that the junk seed, you hopefully a neighbor's feeding at and they'll all go attack their yard. But if you go to a good feeding system, you can discourage them. So that's a transition to spring that a lot of people have to make. All right, now not all birds that are coming in right now are a problem. Like one of the early spring arrivals are the rufous-sided or now eastern towhees, and you see them on the ground under your feeders. They scratch like a chicken. They kick with their feet, and they scratch around in the leaf litter and things. But a lot of times in spring, that's about the only time we see them at our feeders very much, is in the early spring when they first get back. And they start arriving really early, mid-March, late March, and then more of them will come in April. So this is a bird to be looking for. He's got the solid black head. The rufous side, his belly is white, so he's not a robin. The robin has a completely rufous belly, whereas he only has the rufous on the sides and a red iris. They have a red iris, which is pretty cool. And then another bird that comes in really good numbers, one of the more common sparrows that nest in our yard, is the chipping sparrow. And those start arriving now. They don't winter very far south. I know that people report them in Springfield and places like that during the winter, but they start coming in and they'll start singing and they'll be in your backyard. They're one of the more common sparrows under your feeders. Now, it's not going to be the only sparrow, because what happens is a lot of the birds that wintered, especially down in the pine forest of East Texas and Arkansas and even in Oklahoma, those birds start returning north and they pass through our area. And so you can see, really cool birds that are just passing here maybe for a day or two, like the red crossbill. You can see the bill is crossed like that. They're a lot of times are moving back north, and people look out there and wow, 1 or 2 days they had these cool red crossbills on their bird feeders. And you may have had pine siskins on your feeders all winter, but then you look out, they're gone, and then next thing you know, you have a few out there. And a lot of times those are those birds that wintered far to the south that are moving back through. And so you get to see those, and that's really cool. Those are things to look forward to in this early spring period. Now, what can you do to help your resident birds and get an early start on the birds that are going to stay here and nest here? Nesting material. You can hang out nesting material right now. A lot of birds are already starting their nesting cycles. Mourning doves start very early, and the house sparrows, of course. But even chickadees, cardinals, you've heard them singing. If you've been out in the mornings, a lot of those birds are starting to sing in established territories. It is their reward for toughing out our winters here to get prime nesting sites and to get an early nest in, versus those birds that spend the winter down in the tropics. They get a later start on nesting, like the orioles do whenever they get back. So putting nesting material out now is a good idea. Nesting material like feathers and strings and cotton. Please do not put out dryer lint. I talk about this every spring. Dryer lint is very bad for birds. It's too dusty. There's too fine of particulates in it. And when people put that in a nest box and those adult birds and baby birds start flapping their wings around there, it stirs up those really small particles, and they can get into the baby bird's lungs, and they're very sensitive. Do not put dryer lint out. Put things like we said, feathers and string pieces and cotton, things like that. Those are nesting materials that actually help them. One of the coolest nesting materials, because everybody's dogs are shedding in the spring. This is a tufted titmouse who is pulling out hair out of a chow of one of our customers and flying off with a very bold bird. But if you're combing your dogs right now and you're getting big clumps of dog hair,
they're saying not to do it if they use topical flea and tick meds.
Yeah, that's a good point. Ruth is saying, this is a great idea unless you use some of the flea and tick killer that is applied topically on the skin, that can be transferred into the hair, can be partially in the hair. But I comb my lab, I don't use that, and I put my lab hair into a basket, and the birds take it and put it in their bird's nest. So that is something you can do to help the birds. Now, this is a great time for birdhouse maintenance. Things like bluebirds and wren houses and chickadee houses that you have out. This is a great time to do some maintenance on them, because it's early for the bluebirds to start really doing egg laying and everything. But if you have a bluebird house that you need a little improvement on, like a predator guard, to put around the entrance, that you can extend the hole after. Maybe the woodpeckers have pecked out around the hole and made it wider. You can use something like this to get the hole back to the 1.5 inch size that it needs to be. If you've never put in a nest lift in a box. This goes in the bottom of the nest box, and that keeps that nest off the bottom of the box, and so it keeps it drier, and it keeps the bugs down from being able to build in, or populate that wet grass in the bottom of a nest box. So a nest lift is another great thing. Some improvements you can do for the upcoming nesting season. So because it is coming. I read one time that spring moves 17 miles a day north. That's basically how spring is moving right now, so heading toward us. So you got some time to do some of this work, but it's a great idea, and it's a great topic to talk about today, because we've all been cooped up and it's been cold, and now it's time to start thinking about the spring birds. Yes, we'll talk about hummingbirds, we'll talk about orioles in weeks to come. Remember, early April, but really more like the middle of April. We say tax day is a safe day to get your hummingbird feeders out and your oriole feeders out. So we'll talk about that in the future. So please check out the YouTube channel. Go to backyardbirdcenter.com and look around there. Lots of articles, a lot of videos on there to watch on other topics. So thank you so much for your support. Send in ideas for future programs. And until then, come by and let's talk birds.